Okay, we're going to get the program started. Thank you. I'm always tempted to announce my candidacy for something, but can't think of anything I want to run for. I kind of like the current job. My name's Bob Bixby. I'm the executive director of the Concord Coalition, a job for which I did not need to be elected, and I am enjoying not having to be reelected. My job this evening, first off, is to thank everybody for coming to our 20th anniversary dinner. It was 20 years ago this year, this month, that Paul Tsongas, Warren Rudman, and Pete Peterson started the Concord Coalition. I had worked for Paul Tsongas on his presidential campaign. I was a big admirer of Warren Rudman's, and I thought that's an organization I'd like to be involved with, and I have been ever since. So it's been a wonderful experience, and one of the great things about working for the Concord Coalition and being executive director is being able to work with some really terrific board members, our co-chairs over the years, not just Paul Tsongas and Warren Rudman, but when Paul Tsongas passed away, we prevailed upon Sam Nunn to become our co-chair, and he accepted that task in 1997, and for 4 years was our co-chair along with Warren Rudman. And then Bob Kerrey became our co-chair, serving with Warren Rudman. And earlier this year, Bob got really enthusiastic about doing a project and getting really actively involved, and Concord really needs to get out there and push things, and Bob got so carried away with it, he decided, by God, I think I'll do it myself and run for the Senate. So Bob is not with us here tonight at the dinner, and not having a co-chair, I said to Warren Rudman, do you think that Sam Nunn would agree to come back to the chairmanship after all the 4 years that Sam Nunn was co-chair, with the 4 years that coincided with a balanced budget, a fact that he has frequently pointed out. So he didn't want to ruin his record, but we asked him, and we're very, very grateful that Senator Nunn agreed to come back to be our co-chair, at least temporarily. But his one condition was, if I do this, I really want to make a big effort, make a big push, and Concord should be very actively involved in this, solving this budget dilemma that we have. So we have done that. We have embarked upon a new project that Senator Nunn will probably mention with other organizations. So without further ado, to get the program started, let me mention one other thing in your programs tonight. One donor, big donor for our dinner that we are very grateful for, that came in a little bit after the program was printed, is Coca-Cola, and we're very appreciative of their support. So with that, Senator Nunn.
Thank you very much, Bob. And it is true that when I left the United States Senate, we were beginning the debate on what to do with the surpluses, so that puts me in the proper age. Thanks, Bob. It's a real pleasure for me to be here to mark the 20th anniversary of the Concord Coalition, but most of all to honor some very courageous members of the U.S. Congress, our 2012 economic patriots, and they are listed right here for all of you to see. Some of them were here earlier, some of them are still here, but we'll have a proper recognition of them in just a moment. 20 years ago, as Bob just mentioned, Paul Tsongas and Warren Rudman and Pete Peterson got together and they formed the Concord Coalition, a bold new endeavor. Our partner, Warren Rudman, could not be here tonight. Warren is a real battler, as all of you who know him. Right now he's battling to restore his health, and I'll always bet on Warren to win the battle. So we are thinking of him tonight, and we are all grateful for his friendship, for his leadership on these and many other issues, very important issues for a long time. Concord is devoted to two very important ideas. First, that our nation must embark on a path of responsible and sustainable fiscal policy. And second, that it is our generation's duty to continue the American tradition, which goes back many, many years, of providing a solid foundation for those who come after us. We're not doing very well on either count at the moment. From its beginning, Concord has blended the passion of a grassroots movement with the objectivity and the honest math of a research institution, and that unique combination has given us staying power under the outstanding leadership of Bob Bixby and this outstanding team of Concord Coalition staff members. As all of you know, Concord believes that our nation today is not on a sustainable fiscal path, in fact, on a very dangerous fiscal path. It's not a matter of ideology, it's a matter of simply adding and subtracting, and we as a nation are flunking the course now in arithmetic. With these critical challenges in mind, Concord has recently assembled a distinguished group of former U.S. senators and representatives. I call us, before others do, the over-the-hill gang, but we're trying to guide a national effort to protect our children's future. Working with several other like-minded organizations in a bipartisan effort called Strengthening of America, Our Children's Future, Concord is hosting 4 fiscal forums to help raise public awareness and public understanding of these critical issues. Beyond the numbers, each forum will demonstrate that Democrats and Republicans can and indeed must work together when our nation's economy is at risk, as it is today. Last week, former Secretary of Treasurer Jim Baker and Bob Rubin discussed the economic implications of our current fiscal troubles, both at home and abroad. On Monday of this week, we heard from former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates and former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Mike Mullins on the national security consequences of our growing debt. We also heard from the 4 leaders of the Simpson-Bowles and Rivlin-Domenici commissions who outlined their approach to fixing the debt. On Thursday, September the 27th, next week in New York, we will discuss taxes and growth with Larry Summers and Marty Feldstein, plus a second panel of business leaders, including Dave Cody, Maya, who has been so active in rounding up a lot of CEOs to address this problem. On Monday, October the 1st, we'll hear from John Taylor out at the Hoover Institute at Stanford, Alice Rivlin, Donna Shalala, and Bill Frist on entitlements and health care, the heart of our spending challenge. Bob Bixby has exciting plans to follow up on these forums. He's working very closely with a broad coalition called the Campaign to Fix the Debt, led by Maya McGinnis, and Maya has joined us here tonight. So this group is doing exciting things. And Bob, we thank you and the Concord team and Maya and your folks for really working hard, and there's a lot more to come. And now to my assigned task, to honor our congressional heroes. The 38 House members we recognize as economic patriots tonight stood up to their own parties to cast a vote for crucial and structural fiscal reforms. They point the way very courageously that must be followed by our nation. By putting their country before their party and their conscience before their own politics, these members, dubbed the Brave 38 by the news media, embody the spirit of bipartisanship and fiscal stewardship that have inspired the Concord Coalition since its inception. In our era of global, rather partisan gridlock, such cooperation is all too rare. It's what we at Concord call economic patriotism. We're pleased to have with us tonight Jim Cooper and Steve LaTourette, who introduced and sponsored the legislation that very similar to Simpson-Bowles, Domenici Rivlin, and all their colleagues who voted with them. Steve LaTourette has served Ohio's 14th District since 1995 and is a member of the House Appropriations Committee. The Akron Beacon Journal said Steve has, quote, demonstrated a refreshing independence and a much-needed capacity to work with Democrats. Steve, you are a very valuable leader. You deserve our high praise. We thank you for your courage and for your leadership. And I'm going to ask Steve to come up, and then I also want to talk just a moment about our other honoree. They're going to be standing, Steve and Jim, in for everybody else. We've given all those who came to the reception their award, and Jim and Steve are going to be here representing the whole group. Next, Tennessee's Jim Cooper has represented the volunteer state as the 4th District Representative from 1983 to 1995, and as the representative from the 5th District since 2003. I think I know one when I see one, and Jim is a Blue Dog Democrat. Jim knows it is essential to work with colleagues across the aisle, and he knows it's essential to lead rather than to follow. Jim, we thank you for your courage and for your leadership. And come up with Steve. Let's give Jim and Steve a big round of applause. I'm going to ask, I don't know how many of our other honorees are still with us tonight, but I'm going to ask all of you that are still here to please stand, and let's give them a round of applause. And Bob, will you come up and let's appropriately, this is not as good as a campaign contribution, but it's the best we can do at Concord.
Okay, this is the Economic Patriot Award to Representative Steve LaTourette. Thank you very much. And to Representative Jim Cooper. Okay. Let's go now.
You gotta pretend like we like each other.
Yes, there you go.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm kind of disappointed they turned off the soft jazz in the background because I was getting ready to slow jam the budget. But no, it's a genuine honor to be here, to be honored by one of the legislative giants of our time, Sam Nunn. It is a distinct pleasure. And don't you just love the way he says Concord Coalition? You can tell where people are from. That's great. But no one deserves more credit than Bob Bixby and the good folks at the Concord Coalition. They've done an awesome job for 2 decades now to highlight the most predictable, the largest problems our nation has ever faced, and yet one that we failed to deal with until hopefully the lame duck session comes up this year, and hopefully we'll have the courage and wisdom to deal with it. I'm also especially proud of Maya McGinnis and the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget because she too is doing awesome work. And together, it's really my colleagues who deserve the credit. You know, I see a John Carney over there, a Jared Paulus, a Chris Gibson, a Cynthia Loomis, a Don Young, a Dan Lipinski, a Jim Himes, a Dan Boren. If I missed anybody that I saw them standing up, those are awesome individuals. And they're the ones who deserve credit for this because it was a tough vote. And anybody who's ever served in the legislative body know what a tough vote is. But Charlie Dent, I missed you. Bob Dole, excuse me. I want to make sure that all the folks that deserve credit because this was not the easy thing to do. And yet they did it. They did it for the good of the country. And we're about to face one of the toughest few months that our country has ever faced as we face the fiscal cliff, $7.5 trillion worth of decisions that have to be done before the end of the year. So it takes the brave men and women in this room to get it done. So thank you for focusing on this essential national problem. Thank you for doing what you can to give other members courage because we've got to grow the brave 38. This is just a small seed of a beginning. We don't know whether the real movement will start first in the Senate or in the House, but it's got to start somewhere, and it's got to start fast. So thank you for making this happen. Thank you to the Concord Coalition. I'm proud to be here. And let's not get 38 next time. Let's get a majority to do it. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be mercifully brief so we can get to the panel and then all go home. And so I'm grateful to the Concord Coalition and thank you for this recognition. But as Jim said, I'm really grateful for our colleagues. And as you look at this list, the amazing thing to me, I mean, it was a tough vote for everybody. But, you know, Don Young sitting back there, and he doesn't care. I mean, he votes anyway. He starts yelling from the back and everything else. But the freshmen that cast this vote, they really stand out to me because this was a difficult thing for a freshman to do. And I think all the freshmen are Republicans, and that's only because we would have had Democratic freshmen, except there weren't any in the class of 2010. So I'm only kidding. But it was a tough vote, and you know, and I'm glad you're honoring everybody tonight because you know. I'll walk through after the vote. I was walking through the hall, and Boren says, "Really, 38? Really? You made me do that for 38? Really?" And so it's nice that they get the recognition I think they deserve for casting that very difficult vote. And you know, if you think about 38 out of 435, it's really not the high watermark of our legislative career. And my wife, who was a very wonderful glass half empty person, said, "You know, what, you got to love Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is the only place in the whole world, probably, where you can get 8%, and they throw this really nice party for you." So listen, this this is something that really has to be tackled. And as we deal with sequestration and the Bush tax cuts and all the other stuff that's coming up, I mean, the message that we spread is that if you do the big fix, whether it's Simpson Bowles, Rivlin Domenici, or some other carnation, it takes care of all those problems. All of them are factored in, rather than twisting and turning and fighting and putting the defense people against the non-defense people and the entitlement people. But the forces, they're not forces of evil, but the forces out there are very strong against this. And everybody likes the concept, but they don't want to touch anything that's important to them. And, you know, Jim and I, just in an informal whipping thing, had probably over 100 people were going to vote for this. That was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By 9 o'clock, it was down to 38. And it was not, you know, even though the whips organizations sometimes get yelled at and say, oh, the heavy hand of the whip organization, they had nothing to do with this. This was outside groups on the right and the left that began at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, making phone calls, sending faxes, sending emails, and basically scared people. And if you're a Republican, it was the guys, the no-tax guys. If you're a Democrat, it was the entitlement guys. And it's Concord and other groups that really got to fix that. And we got to get this thing done, and we're going to try to do that. I'm going to retire at the end of this Congress, and I was in the Speaker's office today, and he said, are you going to miss us? And I said, well, I'm not going to miss 47% of you, but the rest of you I'm going to miss. So thank you very much.
Well, back in the last century, we used to work with bipartisan groups that would put budgets together, and among the two that we worked with then were Representative John Tanner from Tennessee and Mike Castle from Delaware. And I can remember, supporting and having a press conference even about the Castle-Tanner budget or the Tanner-Castle budget or whatever. And Tim Penny is here, used to do the Penny Kasich budgets. And so we thought it would be appropriate for the panel discussion tonight to invite John Tanner and Mike Castle to join us and reflect a little bit on how things have changed and how things stay the same, join Mr. Cooper and Mr. LaTourette. And so I'd ask the duo of Castle and Tanner to come up to join the panel. And then joining me as the co-moderator will be Diane Lim Rogers. Where is Diane? Diane is the chief economist of the Concord Coalition, and will make sure that none of us say anything that's economically inappropriate. Okay, so am I on? Before we get started, it just occurred to me that and I'm looking at some of the sponsors of the dinner tonight, and you hear such responsible names in this room. I mean, Concord Coalition doesn't really mean much unless you know the history. It's Warren Rudman and Paul Saunders we're talking about. Concord, Massachusetts, and the Americans there who took responsibility for the future and in their own hands. But you look at but it could be a grape organization, or it could be about airplanes or something. But when you listen to there are organizations called the Bipartisan Policy Center that's here tonight over here. And there is the Common Sense Coalition, which is over there, and the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, represented by Maya, who may still be here or maybe not, I don't know. But anyway, so I mean, you hear such wonderful names like that. I mean, so we're all here in that sort of centrist, sensible mode, and hopefully we can bring all these things about: bipartisanship, a responsible federal budget, and common sense. And I guess that leads to our panel. I thought I'd just begin by asking Mike Castle and John Tanner. Let me start with Mike. When it seemed in the old days that there were more opportunities to work together on a bipartisan basis. As a matter of fact, we never gave you and John a economic Patriot award for putting together a bipartisan budget, and maybe it's a sign of the times that one gets an award for doing something like that. But maybe you'd just like to talk about how you got together on your budgets and how you think things have changed.
Well, I'm just shocked that you would think, Bob, that we don't get together well now in the Congress of the United States. It just seems to be very friendly at all times and that kind of thing. I would first like to thank you and to thank Senator Nunn for your extraordinary work in making sure that people are looking over the budget. I would obviously like to congratulate Steve and Jim, but also the 38 who cast tough votes, including my Congressman, John Carney, and I think that deserves a great deal of credit, and for that we're all thankful. I think we are on the verge of a change in the Congress of the United States, and hopefully at the White House, not necessarily who's going to be there, but in terms of the thinking that may go on there. I believe that the American public has had enough of the unbalanced budgets, enough of the deficit, and I believe that they think the economy is being impacted by this. And for that reason, I think that the members of Congress who are running are going to be paying a lot more attention to budgetary issues, to spending issues, than they did before. And I think, frankly, anybody who voted for this legislation will be able to hold that up proudly in terms of their election process. In Congress, as a lot of people in this room know, it's a matter of working together. And John and I did work together on welfare reform, for example, as well as budget issues and other issues, and it makes a difference. It's relatively simple. You just talk to each other and do that. And by the way, I looked at that list of 38, and it's roughly divided between Republicans and Democrats. An open book, if you will, for working together to get things done here in the future. But I think a couple things in terms of where we're going, Bob. I think the economy is starting to do slightly better. I'm not suggesting we're completely out of the recession or whatever we're in right now, but I think we're doing slightly better. which is good. I think a heck of a lot of people are probably going to take capital gains. They're going to sell their Apple stock or whatever it may be between now and the end of the year with the fear that the capital gains tax may go up next year. I'm not sure what's going to happen with sequestration. Are much greater experts than I in this room on that subject. But my sense is that's probably not going to continue as sequestration, and there will be changes made to that. But if anyone thinks that there's not going to have to be reductions in spending this year, next year, probably the year after, or whatever, I just think they're very wrong. Until there's a true economic recovery, that's just not going to be the case. And my view is that everybody has to talk to everybody else. Sometimes people are critical. I'm a Republican. Sometimes people are critical of the Obama White House for various things, and I don't necessarily share all that criticism, but I do share, or at least I have one concern, and that is I don't think they have communicated particularly well with the Congress, Republicans or Democrats, in terms of what needs to get done. I think that's where it starts, right there, and I would hope if he's reelected that he would do that, and I hope if Romney is elected that he will understand immediately that he needs to do that, and he needs to sit down with the members of Congress, give them cover if they have to cast tough votes to do what they have to do. It may involve tax increases, and I don't care what pledge anyone has signed. That may be a part of it. If it's a small part of a bigger solution in terms of balancing budgets, that's where we should be going in this country. But I believe the public is coming to that understanding and that conclusion. For that reason, I hate to be too optimistic. That's always a danger in politics. It's a danger cheering for the Philadelphia Phillies right now, too, I might add. But the bottom line is I think that the opportunities are there. And I think this particular group, and thankful to all those who helped with the Concord Coalition, but this particular group can help push to that ultimate conclusion.
Well, I'm a Red Sox fan, so optimism is out the window for me and has been for some time. John, did you just want to have some reflection on what the prospects are for some bipartisan cooperation going forward?
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Senator Nunn, who's been leading an effort here. Everybody here is a good guy, or you wouldn't be here, because none of this is about us. It's about who's coming after us. And so everyone here, thank you for being here. Thank you to Jim Cooper and Steve and all of you all who voted for this. You're all good guys, because it's not about you, it's about the future. Mike and I did work a lot together. When the allure of, we were on the same hall, our offices, and when the allure of walking over to the Capitol at midnight to vote on a non-binding motion to recommit with instructions wore off, both of us were ready to do something else. The mere fact that we're having this, as one of my heroes, Charlie Stenholm, who was here before I was, well knows, is really a commentary on our inability to put our country ahead of our own personal agendas or our political party agenda. We have a situation I talked about the other day, and Senator Nunn knows well. 50 years ago, from the state of Tennessee, as Jim Cooper well knows, the Supreme Court, in the case of Baker versus Carr, decided that legislators would have the ability to draw congressional districts, well, state house and state senate as well. So that now the country has become so polarized, both by the media, 24-hour media, depending on which TV show you watch, as well as the Congress itself. After the 2000 reapportionment, I hadn't checked the 2010 yet, there are only 91 seats out of 435 that were even within the hypothetical margin of error of the 50-50 voting pattern. A lot of people don't realize that. But these members, as well-intentioned, as earnest, as honest, and so forth as they are, come here, in a sense, politically crippled. Because if the election is in the party primary, and they attempt to work with the other side to go in the sane, sensible middle and work something out for the good of the country, they're bombarded in the next party primary 24 months later. This is a rotten system that good people are trapped in, and I think that deserves consideration in terms of where we are. There's no question it's a fight for the future, not for the present. I was in this very room when Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, and I was telling Carla at lunch, or at dinner here tonight, when Leon Panetta brought that home in a way that I hadn't heard, and I apologize in advance if I make anyone's sensitivities over religion, if I step on that. But the story goes, a rabbi and a priest go to a boxing match. And right before the first round, one of the fighters goes like this. The rabbi says to the priest, "Father, what does that mean?" And the priest responds, "Not a damn thing unless he can fight." So I apologize for religious insensitivity. But what I'm saying is we are fighting for a cause that has no real present constituency. Nobody wants your program cut. Nobody wants your taxes raised, so forth and so on. But the urgency of this matter is something that will have to tug at our higher calling as citizens of this country. And so I want to thank the Concord Coalition, everybody connected here. You're all good people. You wouldn't be here. Thank you, Bob.
Diane?
So, Mr. Tanner, speaking of sensible solutions, we kind of all know that it's basic arithmetic, right? All these groups in this room have always talked about how there's no way to reduce the deficit and get our debt to sustainable levels unless we cut spending and raise revenues. But those sticking points, those are political sticking points, and they pretty much divide according to party lines. So I'm kind of curious from Mr. Cooper and Mr. LaTourette, how do you convince the 38 to turn into majority, given that revenues are a big sticking point with your Republican colleagues, Mr. LaTourette, and entitlement reform is a really big sticking point with your colleagues, Mr. Cooper. So how do you make something that's so economically sensible become politically sensible as well? What are you trying to do with your own colleagues?
Well, you know, Diane, that America has always responded in our history to a crisis. We've done the right thing. And I think the crisis is already here. Some of our colleagues haven't sensed that yet. Moody's just this last week said that they would join Standard & Poor's in downgrading our federal treasury debt, which is an astonishing blow to American sovereignty. But apparently that hasn't stirred people yet. So we have a great deal to do. Most of our colleagues in their hearts want to do the right thing, but they also don't want to lose their seat. So I think it's probable that in the Senate, where there's a shred more collegiality than there is in the House is basically a war zone these days, which is another reason to particularly congratulate the 38 for being willing to bridge those differences. But the Gang of Six in the Senate, I think, has grown substantially. Of course, you have a supermajority hurdle there in the Senate, but I'm hopeful, especially with the Fix the Debt group and Concord Coalition, things like that are happening, that enough of our colleagues will realize the grave danger. Because y'all know that the past is overrepresented in Washington. The future is represented, or the future is underrepresented. So we've got to do a better job of making sure this country has a bright future and we stay number one. And when Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warns us that it's the gravest threat that we face, much worse than any terrorist threat or the rise of China, we should pay attention. And not quite enough of our colleagues are doing that yet.
First of all, I never thought I'd be on a panel where I was the only one with an accent, so that's a new thing for me.
From Michigan, yeah.
I'm glad John brought up redistricting because, most people in the Congress aren't going to lose in a general election. I mean, it's going to be in the high 90s. And so the threat is to somebody like me, somebody to a blue dog on the other side, is getting primaried, and so in my party, what you don't want is a well-financed Tea Party person. It used to be in the Democratic Party, you didn't want a Kennedy to move into your district. But now it's that you have someone run onto your left. And if you look at sort of who I consider to be sensible folks who got beat in the primary, and you just look across the border in Pennsylvania for me, you got Tim Holden, one of the nicest guys in the world, and you could work with him, and Altmaier as
Jason
well.
Altmaier.
Same thing. I mean, you could work with these people, and so when people see the people that are working with other people getting whacked in primaries, you tend to retreat. In my state, we went from 18 districts to 16. And only my seat's the only one that Senator McCain defeated President Obama by 700 votes. The rest of them, at a minimum, are either R or D plus 7 or 8, which is, I'd never give a speech or go back to my district if I was an R 7 or 8. So, and so it really encourages people to, just to stay true to their party, or else they get whacked. No, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. I will say this, because the speaker's from my state, and I do know him a little bit, I know that he very much wanted to make the big deal with the president a year ago, August. And I think this a great piece in the New York Times about the sort of minute by minute, blow by blow. And I know what happened on our side. The president hasn't had me down for basketball or anything, so I don't know what happened to him. But I know on our side that a group of us had to go talk to the speaker and say, you're out over your skis on this. You have not brought the conference along with you. And if you continue down this path, you're not going to be speaker the day after tomorrow. And that caused him some concern. But I believe in my heart that if he has a willing dance partner in the White House, this speaker will make the big deal, because he knows it has to include revenue, entitlement reform, and everything.
Well, if we get to making that big deal, that kind of reminds me of there are two stumbling blocks. Maybe there are opportunities that are coming up before the next before the next Congress. One, of course, is the election, and the other is the so-called fiscal cliff. And I thought maybe I know nobody here would want to comment on the election. But maybe we'll have some fun with that later. But let's talk about the fiscal cliff first, because that, in this room, everybody knows what the fiscal cliff is. I don't think. But anyway, all those provisions that are expiring, tax provisions that are expiring, and spending cuts that are supposed to go into effect that would, CBO says, plunge us back into a recession. And the dilemma being that they were put in place as a backup mechanism to achieve deficit reduction if more rational means weren't enacted, and those means weren't enacted, and so now we're stuck with a fiscal cliff. So the question then is, what do we do about it, and can we make it an opportunity to go forward? And I guess I would direct it again at the two sitting members first, but certainly Mr. Castle and Tanner could weigh in from on the outside with some advice.
Well, y'all know that about 100 members will be unelected or retiring. So we'll come in the day, or November 13th, with what is essentially I'm calling a zombie Congress, because 100 people will be the walking dead. They'll be voting, but they'll have been no longer elected. And I hope they will have the sufficient legitimacy to be able to be wise and brave. But that's a handicap in a democracy. Now, if we were to wait to the new Congress, then it's at least 100 newbies, freshmen, who really won't know how it works, and they'll say rightly to us, oh, you couldn't solve this for decades, and you want us to solve it in the first few months? So they'll ask for 6-8 months reprieve, and by then we'll be in the next election cycle. So what is going to break that logjam? That's the immediate challenge we face. That's why we need the outside community to come in strong and hard and fast and say, save the country before it's too late. Because when we've even stopped paying for our own wars and relying on a rising China to fund most of these deficits, that is a national security problem. It's not just an economic problem. But we also have a massive amount of work to do to help average people understand what the deal is. When the average voter doesn't think that Medicare is a government program, we have a communications problem. I'm on a bill with Paul Ryan that would send everybody in America a Medicare letter. You've been getting a Social Security letter saying what you paid in, what you might draw out. Where's the Medicare letter? Now, that's news that people can use. That's not a headline in the newspaper about some $1 trillion number that they don't think they're attached to. This is their Social Security and their Medicare situation. And I think a lot of education like that has to be done in a hurry. Otherwise, these big deals among fancy politicians either won't happen or they won't survive. Because this is a democracy, folks. It's got to work for the people back home. We got a lot of work to get that, because it's not happening in the presidential campaign so far. We've got a job to communicate with everybody back home to make it real.
Any thoughts on the fiscal cliff?
Yeah, I don't think you can get to what's going to happen in the short run until November the 7th, because you got to know who won, who lost, and what mood they're in. I mean,
they're going to be mad.
Yeah, well, somebody's going to be mad. But you know, my sense is some of the conservatives in my party are indicating that if Governor Romney is elected president, that we not even have a lame duck, and just kick everything down to next Easter. And there's some. I think if Romney wins, the president's probably a little pissed off. So he's not going to be anxious to work with us. And if the president's reelected, as a Republican, I think that makes the lame duck a greater opportunity. But I'm not supposed to say or believe that. But for this particular issue, to have somebody to talk to. But at the end of the day, there still has to be a mechanism. And when we work with Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles, they go around the country and they get standing ovations. I mean, people are on their feet and so excited about this message. But there's no translation. I mean, here. And what controls here are the outside groups. I mean, I assume Democrats have signed a bunch of pledges and Republicans have signed a bunch of pledges. And so the fact that, again, these bright red districts, these bright blue districts, and these pledges that are held over their heads, and if you misbehave, because elections today, after McCain-Feingold, it's not run by the parties anymore, and they're not run by the candidates anymore. If just take one example, and I'll be quiet. In my state, we have one hot congressional race. Each candidate will raise and spend $2 million, which is about where we are in America today. But already $12 million has been reserved on television in the Cleveland television market by people for or against one of them. Because there's only 20, 30 races. I mean, Steve Israel still thinks he's got a shot at taking the House, but that's happy talk. But there's 25, 30 seats, and you can't withstand $15, $20 million just coming in and pounding the heck out of you. And that's what we got to get around. We have to take those standing ovations that they're getting in the heartland of America and somehow translate it to these few individuals can't control this thing.
Same question to Mike and John, but let me add a new element, because both Steve and Jim mentioned Bowles-Simpson. In thinking about what we might do with the fiscal cliff, is there some thought of perhaps having a different backup mechanism where Simpson-Bowles would be the backup? If you kick something down the road, but the string you attach to the can you were kicking down the road, if I'm not getting too many metaphors here, is something like Simpson-Bowles going into effect rather than an irrational cliff like we have now.
Well, if I can just start on that, John. First of all, I'm all for Simpson-Bowles or the Domenici-Rivlin proposals, or something very close to that. To me, those made sense, and if Congress went in that direction, I think it would probably be a good way of attacking these particular problems, and hopefully they will. But I wanted to point out something else you didn't ask about, and I think there's another villain out there, and I think it's communications in this country and maybe that can be translated to the media or whatever it may be. But the bottom line is now that if you are a Republican and you vote for spending, or worse yet, you vote for some sort of a tax increase, you are going to be attacked by a very conservative media, including certain pundits. I probably don't have to name them, you probably know who they are, as well as a couple of news outlets, Fox and others. And if you're a Democrat and you vote for cutting or anything that might seem to be cutting benefits for people, particularly in the areas of Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security, you're going to be attacked hard on that side. And that's become a tremendous problem. And the political parties are very good at picking up on this. And because of our ability to have instant communications and websites and blogs or whatever, to be able to attack the other side, you're exposed in primaries, you're exposed in general elections, and frankly, most members of Congress would like to get reelected if they can. And that's a huge problem out there in terms of sitting down and working together. In fact, there's a picture of two members of Congress who are in different parties working together in their local paper. It probably costs them some percentage of their votes. I mean, it's become that much of a problem. And I think that the media, and I'm talking about this sort of specialized media, not necessarily the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, but some of the particular writers and TV reporters and talk radio hosts, both local and national, share in this problem of the complete inability to work together. And I think that's sometimes underrated, frankly, in terms of the problems that exist both in the Congress and getting things done in the United States today.
What this, and I'll be a little bit insensitive to the judiciary, but what this idiotic Supreme Court decision has done is turn elections into auctions. Unlimited, unreportable amounts of money has got to be one of the most corrupting things in our way of governing ourselves. I look at what we are facing in this deficit and debt situation is the ultimate test of whether or not we, in our generation, in our time, are capable of governing ourselves or not. Because I tell you, if we do not do something about it, someone else is going to do it for us. And then we lose complete control because we could not muster the political will as human beings called Americans to do something about it before it's too late.
I'm thinking that I'm hoping Mr. Cooper's distinction between, you said zombie members of Congress and newbie members of Congress, I'm wondering, isn't there a better chance that zombies and newbies will be braver about these decisions because they're zombies or they're just naive to actually make some of these tough choices and feel like this is what they should get done because it's the last thing they can get done or because it's the first thing they can get done. And one of my, I'm concerned as an economist about all the talk about the fiscal cliff because everyone has been talking about, oh, no, we can't go over the fiscal cliff because that'll put us into recession. But we also can't not, in some sense, not go over the fiscal cliff or at least not go over some better version of the fiscal cliff, maybe spread over a longer period of time. So how do we take advantage of the zombies and the newbies just for that narrow window of time and catch them before they get hardened and become middle-aged members of Congress and get them to do the right thing in terms of following these bipartisan approaches that you two have so bravely endorsed?
Well, Diane, I think this is where the national conversation has to take place. There are 30 to 60 lobbyists for every elected official. They have a tremendous impact, whether they should or not. And the message from almost every lobbyist basically is to increase the deficit and kick the can down the road because nobody wants to take their medicine. Nobody wants to report back bad things to their boss. There's some senators who've had dinners with CEOs, and one of the main messages to the CEOs is turn off your D.C. representatives. So we're no longer an organized appetite. And this isn't to fault anyone. People are just doing their job. But the collective action problem that we face is immensely destructive for the nation. No one here is so naive as to think on November 7th we're suddenly going to wear halos. Our IQs will not go up after the election. So where is the sudden surge in wisdom and backbone going to come from? Crisis is the best educator, but the crisis is already here. Do we have to face a worse crisis before we react? And then, by the way, it might be too late. I try to focus on business basics that even the average Rotarian back home gets, because they know about the time value of money. And we as politicians take for granted, oh yeah, it would be more convenient for us to decide some of this after the election. But the time value of money is such that every day that we wait costs us another $8 to $12 billion, billion with a B. It makes it hard to take a nap. It makes it hard to go off for the weekend. This is a stunning, so even a month delay is a couple $100 billion that we didn't need to squander, but we are because it's convenient. CBO estimated that the fight over the debt ceiling increase last summer cost us just $1.4 billion. You know how much money that is? That's the salary for every congressman and senator in America for 14 years. And that's just what we blew off because people wanted to interpret a routine procedural vote that really just ratified a vote that they had already made and make a political issue out of it. If you supported the Ryan budget, that obligates you to a $5 trillion debt ceiling increase. And that was the most conservative of the budgets. So they should have at least gone along with a $5 trillion debt ceiling increase, but instead they saw an opportunity to make political hay. That could kill our country, that sort of political gamesmanship, because we've already lost our credit rating. We're going to face another downgrade. So let's get real about these things. And the outside community plays an essential role in helping members understand this. You play an essential role in helping folks back home understand this. Because we've got to solve these problems in just a couple of weeks, folks.
I just want to commend Jim for making progress since this morning. We were on a television program, and he said those of us that aren't seeking re-election will be illegitimate after November the 7th. And so now he's upgraded us to zombie status. I'm very grateful for that. But look, the thing that I find remarkable that's completely different from when I was first elected only 18 years ago, and remember I came in with the wild-eyed Gingrich Revolution in 1994, is that even in that time, there was a recognition that if you were in the majority, you had an obligation to govern. And at the end of the day, that meant producing something. What is really startling to me is the breadth and depth of irresponsible statements that people in the House and Senate are making today, such as we had people that would have, because they would have been cheered on at home, to shut down the government. Well, I did that in 1995. It wasn't so good. We got our butts kicked by Clinton. And I don't think it's a good, sort of fiscal path for the country to adopt. There were people that were urging us to default. There are people in Jim's party that say, well, you don't have to, middle-class entitlements, you don't have to touch them. They're fine. They're solvent for 35 years. Everything's hunky-dory. And now we have people in the Senate saying, well, we think all the Bush tax cuts should expire. Now, I don't know who they listen to, but the people that I trust that have talked to me about that said that would be a very, very, very bad thing for the nation's economy. But people are willing to make threats, and not only make threats, but follow through on them. And that's completely different from when I was there, and I think when John and Mike were there. At the end of the day, people would make noise and rattle their sabers and everything else, but at the end of the day, you figured out a way to get it done so that you can govern. The art of governing, and I don't have any faith in the newbies. I put my money in the zombies, not the newbies. Because it's having been a freshman, watching freshmen now, 9 freshman classes, no faults of their own. They're all wonderful people, but there is this herd mentality. And quite frankly, if you want to get ahead in either party, a good friend of mine says you got to give them your wallet and your voting card. And so, you don't want to screw up and have the majority leader or the minority leader pissed off at you on day one, because that kind of makes the rest of your career an uphill struggle. So those are the problems.
Got any thoughts about newbies and zombies, Mike and John?
I hope that there's some will to get something done sooner rather than later. The problem we continue to kick down the newbies, as you call them, come in, and it'd be like the drunk that was charged with arson. He was accused of setting his bed on fire. And the judge asked him how he pleaded. He said, "I plead not guilty, Judge." He said, "How can you plead not guilty?" He said, "The bed was on fire when I got in it." So I hope the zombies will do something sooner rather than the newbies later. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, I don't know much about newbies or zombies or whether they overlap to some degree. But I go back to something that I had said earlier and that I think is important. I can't stress the importance of the President of the United States in all this. And again, I'm not picking sides when I say that. Who's ever the next president needs to absolutely, I think, campaign during the next 7 weeks, whatever it is, on this particular issue. And then I think after that has to say that we need to work with you, the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to deal with this fiscal problem or fiscal cliff or whatever it may be, to try to balance our budgets and to try to do better and give cover to those who are willing to be helpful to that president. I just think there's been, and this isn't just President Obama, to some degree it's true of President Bush and other presidents before, maybe back to Clinton, who actually balanced budgets. But the bottom line is that is the individual who can actually dominate the news, who can actually, I think, have a greater influence over members of Congress than anyone else, including their own political parties. And my judgment is that if that president sits down with his staff and says, we have got to make this work, you've got to go there, you've got to knock on the doors, you've got to talk to these members, that's one way it can happen. And I just can't stress that enough. I just think that has been an underutilized asset in terms of where we have to go with this. There is a general recognition now in this country this needs to be dealt with, and I believe that is the single best person who can carry it out.
Mike, if I could challenge you on that. I love you, Mike. I love Congress.
Well, I'm not going to like this answer,
Well,
I can tell that.
But we are Article 1 in the Congress. We have an equal, if not a more than equal, responsibility in budgeting. And yet we choose to over-personalize the president, whoever's in the White House, and put all the burden on them. When we have the relationship with our constituents, we can go in and spread a message because we're all reelected usually pretty handily. And yet we want to put it on whoever's in the White House's back. To me, that crushes our presidents, whoever it is, and it also shirks our own responsibility. And we have become so accustomed to it. If I hear any more of my colleagues complain about, oh, you shouldn't have done that, well, what's our plan? We're the ones who are supposed to vote on this. And we have gotten so used to shirking, not Mike, because he carried more than his share of the load the whole time, but so many of our colleagues just think in those terms. Make him do it. And no presidency can succeed if we put that burden on them. You know, the president of the Constitution was supposed to be kind of an administrator. But now in the modern media age, we make them do it all. So Congress has got to step up. And we are fortunate enough to be in Congress at this time. So let's step up.
You know,
If I could.
And if I can just say quickly, Jim, I agree with you completely. But if there is one person who can go to a podium with all the TV cameras and get the attention, it is the President of the United States. Any one of us can do it. We'll be lucky if 2 reporters show up. But he is an individual who can do that. So I think he can be whoever that is, can be a driving force in terms of getting this done. You're right. Ultimately, it is Congress that needs to do it. They've done a miserable job, particularly our friends in the Senate, I might add, who never pass appropriation bills anymore.
Right.
But the bottom line is I think the President can be very helpful in terms of getting there.
And Jim, I like you, but I like Mike better. and so I'm just going to say that I have long believed that if either the President or Governor Romney stood up at that first debate on October the 3rd and embraced Simpson Bowles or diminished the big fix, that individual will be the next President of the United States. I believe that. And so while you're right about how the Constitution came there, you know, I fight with my very conservative people would say, it's not in the Constitution. Well, there's a lot of crap that's not in the Constitution that's happened in 220-some years. And so, therefore, I think the presidency has morphed into something it was not intended to be, but that's where we are today. And I agree with Mike that the President of the United States the country's crying out for leadership. And quite frankly, as popular as we are, it's the president can get that done, whoever that person is. So.
We have time for one more question. I should say that we have a standing rule here at the Concord Coalition that these evenings must be over at 9:30. It's just an ironclad rule laid down years ago. So somebody's going to have to give me a sign exactly, because I don't wear a watch, and that's dangerous for somebody that's trying to end a dinner on time.
3 minutes.
Okay, so we'll have to be brief here, but the experience that you have had with I've been struck in talking to members of the Brave 38 that most of them have survived this with a sense of renewed vigor about it. Nothing more invigorating than having been shot at and missed or something like that. So in combat, and most everybody thinks that was the right vote and seems to feel stronger about it now than at the time. And I wonder if you've had some reflections on that as the leaders of the group.
Well, Bob, the Simpson Bowles had been out there for 15 months before either the House or the Senate was allowed to vote on it. Now, we could have had an earlier vote if Paul Ryan and company, House Republicans, had supported it, because we came close. We got 11 of the needed 14 votes on the commission to bring it forward. But without that 14 votes, we had to wait 15 months. And that's one of the main reasons Steve and I brought it forward, because we thought a work of that importance deserved a vote. The House should be able to work its will. You can't keep something buried forever, not that important. So we brought it out for a vote. There was a lot of fear and trepidation. As Steve said, we had a lot more votes before the interest groups killed us. But of the 38, and some of them were still reluctant then, I've actually felt joy from some of them, because it's not just a sense of relief. They are proud for themselves and for their country and for their great-grandchildren that they did the right thing, that they stood up in a moment of history and did the right thing. And I don't want to call out too many names because I don't want to affect their races, but it is heartwarming to see these folks on the floor say, thank you for twisting my arm to vote for this, because it was the right thing to do. And we just have to reach out to some more folks, because there are tons of others who wish now they'd done the right thing. They are covetous of the publicity received in the Brave 38, but they also feel a gap in their hearts that they failed their children and their great-grandchildren. So we've got to give them an opportunity soon to step up and live up to their title, live up to their responsibility, and keep this country great.
All the Republicans that voted for it were so happy they did. And you can look around the room, and I want to affect their races, because I think anybody that voted for this should be reelected, first of all. But second of all, you talk to, and I'll name one person who's not here, Charlie Bass. Charlie Bass thinks that this vote saved his bacon up in New Hampshire, which is, not really, we don't have many representatives in the northeast of the United States. And so he thinks this saved his bacon, and he's very proud of that vote. And I think everybody on both sides of the aisle is very proud of the vote that they cast. So this was a net plus. But we need to be missionaries, and I go out and, everybody that's happy, I put them with another Republican and say, look, he's really happy. And things are going okay for him, So, we just have to spread the word, and Governor Romney was a missionary, so maybe we need to engage in a little missionary work ourselves. So.
Well, we hope that as you spread the word and your missionary work, you'll carry with pride your award from the Concord Coalition for showing economic patriotism this year. We thank our board members, John Tanner and Mike Castle, for all the great work they've done over the years. Thank all of our honorees and all of our contributors. This evening is adjourned. Thank you.
Good job, Robert.
Thank you, Mike.
Hold on. Next time we do.